why is this happening? Why is any of this happening at all? Is this just the product of a disconnected consciousness run wild? Is there a meaning behind the madness? Is there a definitive end to our suffering? And if we are being led somewhere, by whom? Who, if anyone, is at the top of the pyramid? Is it aliens? Reptiles? The elite? Perhaps there is no single leader, but rather a mass multitude of agendas all going in different directions. Or is this just all a part of God's master plan? Today, the QAnon movement calls it the deep state, and to us, the first time we became aware of it was mentioned in a book from the early 1990s, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. In this book, they were referred to as the secret government. According to Melchizedek, the secret government has known about the extent of damage we've been doing to ourselves and the world since as early as the 1940s, but have been desperately trying to keep it hidden from the public and sway us from our higher calling. The concept of a secret government or a deep state is useful in explaining how government agencies can gain power by keeping secrets. Most of us today are used to, and perhaps even indoctrinated, into feeling secure in our democratic model of government. It's created a sense of all citizens being involved with and aware of what's going on. And if the citizens believe this, whether it's true or not, it builds trust, but this is not the natural state of power or control. Throughout almost all of history, rulers and those in power had no obligation to be open to their populi. Backdoor deals and secrecy were default settings, and having less people to answer to and explain to naturally gave them more power. Power seekers thrive in secrecy and misdirection.
It's on you to protect yourself. That's why we trust and personally use Aura, today's sponsor. Aura does all the heavy lifting to keep you safe online. They take action against these data brokers and companies who are selling your personal information. Going after them directly, you don't have to lift a finger. Aura handles it. But that's not all. Here's where it gets even more serious. Aura doesn't just stop there. They continuously monitor the dark web for any trace of your personal data. If they find your information floating around in places it shouldn't be, Aura will alert you immediately. They'll let you know fast if anyone is trying to use that data to access your credit accounts or even drain bank accounts. And if the worst happens to you, Aura has you covered. They offer up to $5 million in identity theft insurance to help you recover if someone gets a hold of your information and tries to do real damage. Don't wait until it's too late. Head over to our link, aura.com/anonymous, to try Aura free for 14 days. That's plenty of time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed and start protecting you from these threats.
When Greece introduced democracy and the United States modernized it, it was considered ingenious and revolutionary and for the people. To protect it, the entire ethos of American culture was built around a more open and citizen-run government, and eventually it became the new standard for most of the modern world, and a source of pride for nations that achieved it. But what if this sense of pride and security were an illusion? A front for the real operation, a modern-day human edition of the holographic demiurge. What if, behind the scenes, there exists a power that is influencing not just the direct actions of the US government and both sides of their political spectrum, but also other countries? What if there was a power that held influence over the US, the UK, Canada, and even China and Russia? Power is checked in public, but grows in secret. So it is natural to wonder, if power grows in secret, then how do we know that the most powerful forces directing this play are not also the most invisible? What if some of the greatest conflicts and global events were architected from a secret world government? Not since the JFK assassination has there been a national tragedy so heavily imprinted in American minds, or one that has given rise to quite as many alternative explanations outside of the mainstream narrative. Despite taking place almost 20 years ago, over 42% of Americans today believe that the government and the 9/11 Commission concealed or refused to investigate critical evidence that contradicts their official explanation of the attacks. All of this questioning created a massive alternative narrative of events that covers everything from the days leading up to the attacks, their execution, and the aftermath. The most infamous aspect of the theories is that the collapse of the towers, specifically Tower 7, were the result of controlled and deliberate demolitions, rather than the impact of the planes. This is seen almost to be self-evident, considering Building 7 fell at almost the exact same time as the other two towers, but miraculously without a plane even coming close to it. Surveys even suggest that most people who see a video of Building 7 very quickly begin to question and doubt the official mainstream narrative. Jumping back in time a few days before the event, it is purported that the US government knew about the coming attack days or even weeks in advance and deliberately failed to prevent it, or even purposefully allowed it to happen. This is purported even by Michael Meacher, a former British Environment Minister and member of Tony Blair's government in the UK. Evidence to this is found in the stock value alterations for the airlines that were hijacked leading up to the event, when a huge amount of put options were placed for American Airlines and United Airlines, a financial tool that gives owners the option money if the price of the stock falls. Some economic and business journals have gone on record saying that this is evidence of unusual option market activity in the days leading up to September 11th that is consistent with investors trading on advanced knowledge of the attacks. To put it in perspective, between September 6th and 7th, the Chicago Board Exchange recorded nearly 4,744 put option contracts bought in United Airlines. Then on September 10th, another 4,516 stocks were bought in American Airlines. Naturally, the 9/11 Commission says that the weird behavior was just coincidental. But nevertheless, these put options made someone a lot of money. A separate line of suspicion stems from the actions taken by NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, on that day. There's much speculation about whether NORAD issued a stand-down order to its fighter jets on 9/11, along with delays in the FAA to notify NORAD of the potential threat. According to FAA records, the notification to NORAD about the hijacking of each plane came just minutes before they would crash. Despite the FAA noticing unusual behavior, like a failure to stay on course and a shutdown transponder on American Airlines Flight 11 just 16 seconds after takeoff, NORAD would not be called to action or notified for over 20 minutes. In a country with the most robust and sophisticated defense in the world, a fumble this bad with such dire consequences can't help but add to the mystery around what really took place. Now we get to the controlled demolition. This theory states that explosives installed in the building in advance were the real cause of the collapse and wide-reaching destruction. First shared by Dutch demolitions expert Danny Jowenko, who in 2006 said that the aircraft impact and resulting fires couldn't have weakened the building sufficiently enough to initiate a collapse, and that they wouldn't even have collapsed completely, nor at the speeds that they did, without additional energy involved to weaken their lower structures. He came to the conclusion that this was a controlled demolition carried out by experts, something that has since been supported by some physicists, engineers, software developers, and modelers, along with a range of other fields. The mainstream analysis, in contrast, asserts that the collapse resulted from damage to support columns caused largely by the weakening of columns and floors by jet fuel fires. And of course, you've probably seen the memes by now about jet fuel and steel beams. Stephen Jones, a physicist at Birmingham Young University, along with other researchers, analyzed samples of dust from the World Trade Center buildings and reported that their findings contained evidence of nanothermite in the dust, which are products used in high-level explosives. When he informed the National Institute of Technology about his findings, they argued that there was no way of knowing the dust he analyzed came from those buildings. When he asked them to conduct their own study, they refused. On top of that, eyewitnesses reported seeing and hearing explosions happening before the collapse of the towers, and the organization International Center for 9/11 Studies has published videos with indications about when such explosions could be heard. The collapse of Building 7 also wasn't even reported in the initial report, and NIST, the agency charged with investigating the event, took 7 years to publish anything that even acknowledged it. Looking into who was actually working in the building at the time, you'll find that it housed some pretty interesting residents, including a secret CIA office on the 25th floor, an outpost of the US Secret Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and New York City's Emergency Command Center. All of these secret offices go down the day of the attack. Last but not least, we have the Pentagon. Theorists have argued that the damage done to the Pentagon wasn't the result of a plane, but potentially a missile launched from inside the US government, citing the dimensions of the impact as evidence. After all, how does a plane 125 feet wide and 155 feet long create a hole that's only 60 feet across? It's worth noting that plane wreckage has apparently been found at the crash site, and eyewitnesses say that they saw a plane crash. Even the conspiracy theorists themselves don't agree on the missile idea. But could the witnesses have been paid actors in the know? Could the pieces of plane been planted there? The only footage available is from this security camera, and conveniently, no frames are available to see what hit. Whatever happened at the Pentagon, the question remains: how could a plane make its way not only into the airspace of one of the most secure military sites in the world, but also crash into their most predominant headquarters? Just like Building 7, theorists hypothesize that incriminating evidence of government wrongdoing was targeted in the Pentagon attack. Observing the bigger picture then, why? Why did this happen? The most common theory is that 9/11 provided the United States and the United Kingdom with a reason to enter into a war against the Middle East, most notably Iraq and Afghanistan, providing motive and support from the general public. Most theories about this suggests that the US was after oil in the Middle East, and others purport a variety of banking, corporate, globalization, and military interests for the purpose of creating a globalist government, a one-world order that could be run behind the scenes by the cabal. But the most interesting theory comes from Dr. Michael Salah, who states that Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq at the time, had actually found remnants of a stargate built by the Anunnaki while excavating one of the ziggurats, ancient Mesopotamian temples in Iraq. As a result, he had threatened to use it to interact with the Anunnaki to bring about mass disclosure and domination. Thus, the orchestration of the 9/11 attacks was a deliberate ruse to justify the acquisition of the Stargate and other ancient artifacts and technologies into Western hands. And to learn more about this mysterious species, please watch our Anunnaki movie on YouTube. If any of this is true, then that would imply that at the time, a secret government with their hands in many countries may not have had as much influence as they wanted with certain countries in the Middle East. Or if the secret government had complete control, then for what reason could they have purposefully staged this event? When we pull back the curtain on the workings behind the scenes, things become strange and even frightening. The most infamous mind control experiment in history is MK-Ultra, otherwise known as Project Bluebird. The most terrifying thing about it is that it isn't even a theory. MK-Ultra was a real documented CIA program for which the CIA has faced repercussions legally. It's well established that some of the experiments in the Ultra project were illegal. The US government willingly experimented on its citizens without their knowledge or consent. Yet, no one seems to bat an eyelash. Perhaps because no one really knows the true extent of what actually went on behind closed doors. The official aim was that experiments on humans were intended to develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogations in order to weaken individuals and force confessions through mind control. The program was officially authorized in 1953, but supposedly got reduced funding continually until its disbandment in 1937. There was also the elusive Montauk experiments located at Camp Hero, Montauk, which began in the 1950s. Camp Hero also swirls with conspiracies and rumors of mind control, psychedelic drug experiments, child abduction, and even time travel. It seems incredibly coincidental that the Camp Hero events started in the 1950s, which also experimented with mind control. It doesn't seem to be a stretch to argue these two projects were connected somehow. Interestingly, the events of MK-Ultra came to light in 1975 after an inquest by the Rockefeller Commission, yet efforts to find the background of Ultra were hindered by CIA Director Richard Helm's order that all MK-Ultra files be destroyed in 1973. As a result, the committee had to rely on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the relatively small number of documents that survived Helm's order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MK-Ultra, which led to Senate hearings later that year. As recently as 2018, declassified documents included a letter to an unidentified doctor discussing work on 6 dogs that had been made to run, turn, and stop via remote control and brain implants. During the experiments, modern estimates placed the funding and budget at roughly $87.5 million in today's money. A lot of the early research was focused around the psychedelic drug LSD and whether it could be used to make Soviet spies defect against their will, and whether the Soviets could do the same to the CIA's own operatives. When it first began, they didn't test on strong-minded people though. No, the first tests of the drug were done on mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and sex workers, because, and I quote, they couldn't fight back. According to Tim Weiner, writing in the New York Times, they once administered LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 174 days straight, as well as giving it to their own employees, military personnel, and, scariest of all, unknowing members of the general public in order to study their reactions. Many of the drugs were often administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, which was a violation of the Nuremberg Code after World War II. This is the only place where the CIA got into legal trouble. It is thought that the aim of this was to find which drugs would bring about deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean to be able to program them as robot agents. Later on, another part of the project worked at Menlo Park's Veterans Hospital, where they tested the effects of every kind of psychedelic on the residents there, everything ranging from LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, and cocaine, and even DMT and AMT. another lesser-known psychedelic but similar in nature to DMT. In these experiments, adverse reactions were a pretty common occurrence. One operative who received LSD in his morning coffee became psychotic and ran across Washington, seeing a monster in every car passing him. The experiments continued even after Frank Olson, an army chemist who had never taken LSD before, was secretly dosed by his CIA supervisor and 9 days later plunged to his death from the window of a 13th-story New York City hotel room after falling into a post-trip depression and paranoia. There were some people who did consent, and they were subject to even more extreme experiments, such as being dosed with LSD for 77 consecutive days. The culmination of all of this research, however, was that by 1962, the CIA had developed a series of super hallucinogens, most notably the BZ compound, which was thought to hold greater promise as a mind control weapon. It was at this point that many academics and private researchers became disillusioned with the project. Perhaps the greatest asset we can learn from this revelation coming to light is not only the extreme methods employed by those within the deep state, but also the acknowledgement that just as much as psychedelics can be used for healing and therapy, there is ample evidence now that they can be used to invoke darkness and lasting psychotic states, and it entirely depends on how they're used, messing with the neurochemistry instead of harmonizing it with a higher consciousness. While all of this was happening, they also experimented with hypnosis, with goals of creating hypnotically induced anxieties, as well as increasing an individual's ability to learn complex material and increasing memory and cognitive ability. To do this, the CIA actually ended up setting up what were essentially concentration camps for study. And once again, we see the value and terrors that come with hypnosis. All the while in the mainstream world, it is laughed at as nothing more than superstition. As Stephen Kinzer pointed out, in areas under American control in the early 1950s, in Europe and East Asia, mostly Japan, Germany, and the Philippines, the CIA created secret detention centers so that the US could avoid criminal prosecution and work in secret. The CIA captured people suspected of being enemy agents and other people it deemed expendable to undertake various types of torture and human experimentation. The prisoners were interrogated while being administered psychoactive drugs, electroshocked, and subjected to extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, and a whole host of other terrible things in order to develop a better understanding of how to destroy and to control human minds. These experiments likely developed tremendous understanding of how the brain responds to a variety of extremes and how it interacts with and filters consciousness. But at what cost? And for what ultimate purpose? Could these experiments lead to an influential decision in manipulating the mainstream narrative, perhaps behind 9/11 or even the COVID pandemic? After 1973, when all of this began to come out into the public, it prompted a number of subjects or their surviving children to file lawsuits against the federal government for conducting experiments without consent. Although the government aggressively and sometimes successfully sought to avoid legal liability, several people did receive compensation through court orders, and this whole battle is still going on today. In fact, while the CIA insists that MKUltra type experiments have been abandoned, Canadian investigative journalist Elizabeth Nixon, whose mother was a subject, claims that they continue today under a different name. Returning to the beginning, MKUltra initially came to the public awareness due to an inquest from the Rockefeller Commission. Generally today, when you look into the question of the Illuminati, who are often presumed to be the secret government, the Rockefeller family often appears at the top of the list in association or connection. However, it seems that in this case, the Rockefellers brought something nefarious to light. The question is why? Why would they rat out their own operation if they truly were behind it? Was this all orchestrated as part of a singular greater intention? Or are the Rockefellers playing a different game than has been assumed for so long?